Pilots are becoming increasingly upset about a push towards solo flying. Canadian North is upsetting some politicians, and Flair Airlines opens a Calgary base. Let's talk about it today on episode 2 of Just Plain Fun. Well, welcome to episode 2. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Just Plain Fun podcast. It's been a lot of fun so far. Looking forward to getting into today's stories. Starting off with, obviously, there's been a recent development here in pilots becoming ever increasingly upset about this industry push for solo flying. Some of you might be wondering, well, what exactly is that? What seems to be the frustration? And what's happening right now is the French plane manufacturer Airbus, I'm sure many of you know, obviously, that company, is starting to push towards the idea of having solo manned flight crews after takeoff and before landing. So in the 30-ish minutes after takeoff and before landing, it still would be with 2 crew members, but during the actual flight time, they're saying they're fine to go down just to 1 flight crew member while the other one rests. So the push for this right now is they want this done by 2027, and there are a couple reasons for sure why they might want to be doing this. They mentioned in an article that I will link below that there's obviously the financial reason. We're seeing an ever-increasing cost of pilot salaries, and so they say to justify that, if a pilot's not flying, we don't have to pay them for that time, and therefore we can save some money there. Another is that they say that the pilot that is not currently in the flight deck during the portion of the flight that's not takeoff and landing has the chance to rest. So if you're doing multiple flights in a day, they don't have to meet the same sleep requirements, etc., as they can sleep on the plane during the flight and then get back into the cockpit after the next flight takes off, and basically just switch back and forth to increase efficiency in the airlines. And the other thing that they're mentioning is just the pilot shortage that's being experienced not only in Canada and the United States, but all over Europe and actually the world right now is a huge commercial pilot shortage. And so they're looking at possibilities in how they can reduce that. And so maybe that's the pieces there. However, there's also a lot of opponents to this idea and a lot of people saying, let's take a step back. There's actually something more we have to look into, and that's the gamble with safety. Seems to be the number one issue that the opponents have with this. They're coming at it from a perspective that if you have one pilot in the cockpit and something goes wrong, there might not be enough time, or they don't know exactly what this could actually mean for passenger and crew safety. The second piece that they are really talking about, especially the unions in the space, is that there's actually really no ability to make up for the skills and the expertise that you have with 2 pilots in a flight deck, and if something is to go wrong or something throughout the entire flight course is to change, they're saying that 2 pilots is always better than 1, and that seems to be an industry belief. If you can fly with more than 1 pilot, why wouldn't you do it? And how can we move forward from that piece there? So first news story there, obviously, like I mentioned at the start there a little bit, it is more of a push from Europe. North American airlines are a bit more hesitant, I guess you could say, and they're a bit more focused on the safety piece at the moment. But we'll see where this takes us into the future. Obviously, with the shortage growing every single day, who knows what airlines are going to have to do to actually stay surviving and stay afloat. So that's been some big news. Second piece that I want to dive into here is, again, a bit more focused on the Canadian airline space. And that's here in Canada, there's, like I mentioned in the last episode, a couple major airlines, your WestJet, your Air Canada. But up north, there's a wholly Inuit owned airline, and that is called Canadian North. And so Canadian North is basically there to service the people who live in northern Canada, which there is certainly a lack of the number of people that live there. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it is something like 90% of Canadians live within a couple hours of the United States border. And so the bulk of Canadians are living in that southern peninsula of our country. And so people living up north still, according to the government and according to, Canadian North, need air service and air travel to get around, as oftentimes you'll have your groceries needing to be flown up there. There's no roads leading up there until you actually get to that spot, other than, of course, ice roads during the winter time. So there's just a lot of reasons why Canadian North was made, and therefore began to service the industry and that part of the country. So The reason that there, though, is some pushback right now is that Canadian North, just this last couple of months here, Ottawa announced late back in April that it approved actually some new terms and conditions. So the Canadian aviation space is very heavily regulated, and they're now allowing Canadian North actually to increase their fares up to 25% within the calendar year, as well as only service one flight per week. They were seeing a lot of minimal flights going on. Just one quick sample that I saw in an article, again, that I will be linking below, is that they were seeing flights with an average of 10 passengers on the plane when there was 80 to 100 seats actually that was supposed to be filled. And so there's been a lot of talk back and forth now about the equity and the equality of it here in Canada, obviously a major talking point of a lot of our politicians. One that I will discuss is a new Democratic Party, which is a bit farther left for sure than the Democratic Party in the United States, more of a democratic socialism state, if you want to call it that. Bigger government regulation is more their policy, and a lot more government intervention into business and a lot more regulation. And so one of the NDP representatives up in Northern Canada had said that people across Nunavut and the Northwest Territories are rightfully concerned about the cost of travel in the North, and if we form government, it will be our position that we need to find a way to lower those. And so obviously, again, like I mentioned, there's kind of this weird dichotomy of we already have some of the highest airline travel costs in the world here in Canada, and already one of the most heavily regulated, and some politicians' response is to become more heavily regulated. So it seems to be there, it maybe just isn't as simple as a one-size-fits-all approach. A quick little stat that I'll give is that, like I just said, Canada actually is one of the most expensive places for air travel in the entire world. A recent survey, we were in the top 10 most expensive countries. And for a bit of context, in the United States, so for every 100 kilometers of travel, which is 60 miles, it costs an average of $11.50. Here in Canada, for that same distance, that same 100 kilometers and 60 miles, it is $23.90. It's over 100% increase. So that definitely plays in largely to our high cost of air travel. But not only that, we have some of the highest landing fees at our airports here in Canada. So whenever an airline or, transporter, FedEx, Delta Air, United, KLM, WestJet, whoever wants to land at an airport here, as with all across the world, you need to pay some form of a landing fee. But here in Canada, we pay, again, among the highest in the world. And that actually includes, an average here of 288% more than our counterparts, across the world and the United States. One quick little example that I'll give is if you took a flight from Vancouver to Saskatoon, which is just one province over, or if you want to call it one state from British Columbia into Saskatchewan, it would actually cost you more because of the landing fees and the taxes that we pay here than if you were to go from Vancouver to Hawaii, which is about 2 to 3 times the actual distance. So obviously a lot of talks going on right now on how they can attempt to lower the cost of air travel and what the proper route is. Canadian North representatives have come out and said it's not really feasible for us to try to continue working on this schedule where we're going to keep on providing flights for just 10 people on a flight meant for 100, and we need to start making money or else the airline will need more government subsidy. And so definitely a bit of a back and forth struggle, if you want to call it that, going on in our industry up in Northern Canada right now. And the final story that I want to touch on, and on a bit of a happier note on the cost of air travel here, is actually that Flair Airlines will be starting a Calgary base. And so definitely some really exciting news. They are a low-cost carrier here, an ultra-low-cost carrier, and actually one of them that's not owned by one of the major airlines. We do already have a couple low-cost carriers, such as Swoop, but they are owned by WestJet. And so previously, up until just recently here, a lot of our low-cost carriers were owned by the same company anyways, and so we weren't able to see those same flight discounts that you would, for example, on a EasyJet in Europe or on a Spirit Airlines or JetBlue example in the United States. And so that seems to be one of the major pushes right now, I'll just give a quick quote here from the CEO of Flair. He's also their president. It's Stephen Jones, and he said, "Our relationship with Calgary International Airport will continue to provide benefits to Albertans who have been paying far too much for air travel." And as I mentioned just in this previous case study, the Canadian North issue, we do pay some of the highest exorbitant rates and fees anywhere in the world, as it seems unfortunate we do for a lot of things here in Canada. But besides that, I digress. The base right now, they're only going to be going to a few destinations. They'll be going to London, Ontario, Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, and then a couple destinations in Mexico. But it certainly is a place for us to start. Typically, if you're flying somewhere internationally or domestically here in Canada, you have to allocate about 30 to 40% of your budget just on getting to your destination. So hopefully, with some more competition into our market, we can ease those prices, and it looks hopefully like we'll eventually get there. But as I stated before, it just is a harder thing for the low-cost carriers here in Canada, given the regulation that they face, and given I shouldn't call it the unfairness, but the regulation and struggle that they can face in our Canadian aviation space. And so end on a bit of a happier note there, like I said, with Canada and Calgary and Alberta hopefully starting to see a little bit more affordable routes. We'll be able to see, though, only time will tell if that's going to make a difference on our prices here. It was a lot of fun talking to you guys again today, though. Thank you so much for listening to episode 2. I know that last episode I mentioned that I'd mentioned some of the social media that I've got going. I do now have a Twitter account, so if you want to give me a follow there, that'd be great. I am at Just Plain Fun 380 as well. I do have a YouTube channel where I'm going to start putting some of these podcasts on there. I'm also Just Plain Fun A380. So looking really forward again to our next episode. Hopefully there's not too much crazy things that happen, and we'll see what the next couple weeks have in store for us. But again, just want to thank you for checking out the show. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a future episode, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. Have a great day, everyone.